Okay, let me introduce myself again. I'm Phyllis Dickerson, one of the national board members for the National Forum for Black Public Administrators. I'm going to actually ask the panel to take their seats, and then Fred, I need you to put their lives on them while they take their seats, and then I'll introduce them once they have come into their seats. So go ahead. And you guys, we're going to actually air this live on YouTube, on our city's website, and also, you'll have the last 10 minutes of this hour panel discussion to ask questions. The mics are live on both sides of the room. Please don't make a statement, ask a question, all right? So make sure you understand that. You can go ahead and be seated, and then Fred will put your live on. So on our panel this afternoon, the moderator for this evening is actually Steve Barnes. Steve is a veteran journalist and host of Arkansas Week on ATN. Barnes has been on the air in the Natural State since 1968 when he started as a copy boy on the weekends at KTHV TV Channel 11 in Little Rock. He has not only become one of the most recognizable and respected people in Arkansas, but has connected with a national audience. He has been a recipient of the University of Arkansas Journalist of the Year Award, as well as receiving first prize of television documentary awarded by the Society of Professional Journalists. That's Steve Barnes. Our first panelist is Judge Rita Bailey, is now serving her 10th year as District Court Judge. She serves as Jacksonville Maumelle District Court Judge. She most recently made history during the March 1st, 2016 election by being the first African American to win a countywide judicial race without the benefit of the Hunt Decree, which assures that African Americans will be elected to circuit court judge positions in Arkansas. Judge Rita Bailey. Christopher Wilkerson is a domestic policy professional and political strategist. His background is rooted in advocacy, political training and education, electoral organizing, and public policy. He is presently serving as the interim executive director of the Social Justice Institute at the great Philander Smith College. And Representative Vivian Flowers was sworn in into the 90th Arkansas General Assembly as state representative for District 17, which is Pine Bluff, you guys, by the way, in 2015. Now in her second term, she serves on the House Revenue and Tax, House Aging, Children and Youth, Military and Legislative Affairs Committee, as well as Legislative Joint Auditing Committee. She is the 2017-18 chair of the Arkansas Legislative Black Caucus. Representative Flowers. And last but not least, Sergeant Rodney Lewis is the president of the Little Rock chapter, the Black Police Officers Association. After joining LRPD in 1988, he was promoted to sergeant in 2004. He is responsible for supervising assigned officers, supervising fatality, accident investigation, and detailing follow-up on investigation. He also serves as a supervising member of the department's Crisis Negotiation Unit, Special Response Unit, and Motorcycle Unit. This is our panel for this afternoon. Steve, you ready?
I should begin by thanking Phyllis and her organization for considering me to moderate this panel tonight. It's something I've been looking forward to for a good number of weeks now, and of course we should thank, right off the top, once again, Philander for hosting it, and to pause maybe for a moment to consider what this community would be like without Philander. Just gaping hole in the social and the cultural and the political life of this town that we know, Little Rock state of it. And of course, I don't think it's too much of an exaggeration to say the nation, because as you all know, I hope you know, Philander has, I know you do, Philander has given to the nation an awful lot. And that still reverberates. Now, that said, thanks in advance to our panel. And what I begin by, and Your Honor, will begin with you by asking your overall impressions, well, of the film, the documentary, But what it said, what did you draw from it?
I thought it was an excellent film. Sitting there watching it, I could not help but think about the challenges that African Americans face when they are running for office. And it is a challenge because many times it's not about competency. Many times it's not about who is the best person for the job. Much of it gets lost in who people think is most likely to win. And a lot of times it really does come down to forming relationships with people, letting them know just how competent you are just as an African American or any professional, and forming relationships with people from all different races. And that's how you win elections, is what it showed me. And it showed me that it's still possible. It can happen. It's a challenge. And it also reminds me that a lot of the things are still the same. That was disheartening.
Yeah. Mr. Wilkerson, here's a Philander voice. Your thoughts?
Thought the film was powerful in a lot of ways, particularly how it chronicled his entire career politically. I think what stood out to me initially, particularly regarding Mr. Bradley, was the courage it takes to encourage people to think differently, and how oftentimes when we find ourselves in a polarized political climate, there are really probably way more people in the middle than there are on the fringe. And it takes courage, it takes a lot of effort to bring people together, to see what makes us all human versus what actually separates and divides us. I think it's interesting how we at times can overcome race, but it's always the economy, it's always putting food on the table, those things we can't get away from. And so it's interesting how reflecting on the film and just being aware of what's happening in today's world, how we make different choices, how desperation has a peculiar effect on how we make choices than the way we make choices when we don't feel that same desperation. And as a collective, I think we have a responsibility to see the humanity in others. Otherwise, we don't always sense that collective desperation, and we make choices that, to your point, Judge, is oddly reflective over time we don't want to experience again.
Vivian, or Representative Flo? Sorry, Representative Flo.
So I kind of lost myself and started tearing up, and I know that Judge Bailey was kind of like, well, it's compelling, but what's going on with that? Mayor Bradley was my mayor. A lot of people don't know I grew up in Los Angeles from age 5 to 17, and went through that, and so it was several moments of pride, remembering what kind of mayor he was for the city, and how, on the one hand, he was elected not as a black man or as a black mayor, but as mayor for the city, and was respected as such. And then on the other hand, for so many, people saw him as a black mayor and the black mayor because his election meant possibility. It meant progress. But the emotion came in seeing how quickly such progress and such unity can devolve when people's basic needs aren't met, and when the people are forgotten and start believing that they don't matter, and especially when politics and politicians and policy shows them that. And so I remember when when the young woman, the teenager, was murdered. I remember the Rodney King trial. I remember hearing the verdict. I mean, I remember where I was, and all I kept thinking about when I saw those two examples of verdicts was how a certain segment of people were outraged and so hurt. And I remember thinking back and thinking about how the nation was quiet and everything was okay. But, you know, fast forward to the OJ trial, it was a different story. And so it was a lot of emotions, a lot of issues, a lot of things to think about, which I guess is the mark of a really good documentary.
Yeah.
Your turn, Sarge.
Well, I love the film, but it's sad to see that Los Angeles then and Little Rock now are so similar. I came along to this department in 1990. And some of the things that Mayor Bradley was experiencing, we were experiencing here also. In 1990, where we think that that's modern time and everything has changed, but it had not for the African-American male in a police department of our size and in around our culture. You know, there was certain things, innuendos, words, N-words written on the wall within our police department and even within our FOP at the time. So we know some of these things that Los Angeles was experiencing, especially with African-American males. We know that our city, at one point in time in the 90s, there were 78 homicides within our city, and the majority were African-American males. And that's us fighting against each other with the gang violence and stuff like that. But as time progressed, a lot of African-American police officers started taking tests for promotion because at that time we wanted to see change. And change did come, where when I started here there was only 54 black police officers. Now I think we well over 100, 150, 160 African-American police officers. So we were encouraged, and I can tell you right now, and I know he probably don't want to be pointed out in here, Chief Higgins was one of the main ones to tell us that we need to take the test. We need to be able to get in those positions to where that we can make change. And a lot of us did, and he himself came through the ranks from patrol all the way up to the assistant chief. So he was a big part of the change that came along with the police department, other than the rest of the other African-American males and females that started taking the test. So then we were able to implement change within our police department and then within our community. And as I mean, you all familiar with the OK program that's run by Sergeant Willie Davis. That's one of the programs that Sergeant Davis is a pillar in the community that take African American at risk males off the street, and he brings them into his program and he teach them other things than running the streets. Show them that they can be a professional. Show them that they can be a doctor. Show them they can be a judge. And a number of his kids in this program have gone on to scholarships and major universities. And I applaud him for that. So change is about, we just got to stay on top of
I
it.
think then was the sergeant, or at least I heard tinctures of optimism. And I time just last night, I wanted to kind of juice it up and get in my own brain. And my overriding thought was that in my time, which is only slightly shorter than Mom Abrams' time there, everything old is new again. I mean, we just keep fighting these same stubborn, seemingly intractable problems. And yet along comes a Bradley. Along comes an Obama. Along comes The gentleman from New Jersey, doing a fine job in the U.S. Senate, and his ideological counterpart in South Carolina. So, yeah, the movement can get traction, but it is such a slippery slope, and the soil is so soft. Anybody want to pick up on that? Representative, am I overstating things? Am I making it darker than it is, or?
No,
I get weary.
So my reaction was to the film, but if I had to sort of juxtapose that with where we are now, it is eerily similar to what we see happening nationally, what we see happening in the state, and it's scary. You know, it's scary to me to think about and to see not only how citizens are treated, and we know that, and I remember when the Rodney King beating occurred, and how so many of my white friends and white people I would meet were shocked. They just were shocked. They couldn't believe that it happened and wanted to believe that there was a good reason. And so even with the videotape, and so back then, y'all, for everybody younger than 40, there were no cell phones. Nobody was carrying a camera on them. So the fact that somebody even caught it with a camera, which the camera I think was like this big, right, was amazing that people could see something like that occur on the street. And even then, it was the verdict did not match what really happened and what we all saw. And so when you see that now we have people capturing things on camera, police dash cams, I'm more than weary. It just is heart-wrenching, and it's angering. And, you know, that scene where Mayor Bradley said, now, I'm angry just like everybody, but let's be calm. And then the next scene is everybody was about it.
It was over. Right.
You know? And that's because what else do you do? So if your community is not getting resources, not getting infrastructure needs met, not getting jobs, that sounds a whole lot to me like South Arkansas. What do you expect?
And people who are desperate will resort to desperate measures. That's what I find. I mean, that's just human nature. And if an agency that's to protect you is causing you more damage or pain than your situation, you are going to take matters into your own hands. I mean, that's just, and it's hard a lot of times for people like us who are in this room to relate to that. And I think that's what I find even now, like on the bench. It's hard to relate to a situation that a person has, and if you've never even been remotely close to what they're dealing with. So I try really hard. It's just making me think through how they were talking about how in different agencies, how the police were able to do whatever they wanted without any type of repercussions or anything. And you have to think about the different branches of government and how things are supposed to work, which is, you know, it exists, but it doesn't always work that way. So what we who are actually in office have to do or in a position is to make sure that you try to even the playing field as much as you can. I mean, I can't control what officers do out on the streets, but on the bench, I can most certainly make sure that I'm not rubber stamping everything that the police officers do. And there are times that, I mean, I do have to, you know, find people guilty, but I'm making sure that the standard of proof is met. You know, you don't compromise that, and it doesn't matter what area of town, you know, it occurred in. But I think that's the one thing that we can do is to just make sure we do our part to even that playing field.
I doubt I was the only one to watch it. It took me I went back, made sure I heard it correctly. Following the last significant uprising or conflict in Los Angeles involving Koreatown. I think that was us. One of the observers said, you need to understand this was not a race riot. This was a food riot. It was a food riot. They had no jobs. There's no prospect of anything. This wasn't necessarily just about race. It was about rights and opportunity. Mr. Wilson?
So, to be clear, policies create the conditions with which we live. And it starts with how you set. Race is a trap. If we allow the trap of race to permeate how we make policy decisions, those policies will be inequitable. And you cannot escape the consequences of inequitable policy. So folks find themselves desperate when jobs are unavailable to certain folks, when the criminal justice system is just disparately disaffecting some communities versus others, when wage growth is either non-existent for some, stagnant for others, and ridiculously profitable for some. And then you come back and turn around and say, well, why don't you have some personal responsibility? At some point, that volcano will erupt. And that's what we saw happen in LA. That's what we've seen happen in Baltimore. That's what we saw happen in Ferguson. Saw the chokehold, and those things just literally rip the pin out of the grenade. So when you ask about, when you highlight how the gentleman said it was about bread, it's always about bread. These students right here, you know, will tell you in a minute, like, yeah, class is important, but hey, I'm trying to keep my lights on. I'm hungry, right? I'm impoverished, I'm poor, I've been homeless, and I'm a college student. I'm supposed to be bettering my life, right, college students? Right? And feel the sting and the pain, because where a lot of us come from don't have the support to get us through. So we just trying to make it and trying to support back home. And so all of this is too right. And it's ridiculously unfair for no reason. And that's the problem. It's the no reason part. There is more than enough, if there's will and courage, right? There's more than enough for folks to have a chance to create a decent life for themselves. And when we don't approach policy making, this is why it's critical to have a reflective democracy, people who look like the folks they serve representing people, because then you have the consideration of persons or families or community circumstances, so that those policies don't disaffect one versus another, and we have some sense of equity, which is just fairness. Just fairness. Equity going into the policy decision, so that, yes, some may win more than others, but at least then we are all have a chance to win. Barack Obama developed a wonderful coalition, and he never ever once shied away from being honest. It's capitalism. He was going to be the president of the United States, and he was going to be a capitalist, just like Tom Bradley was in LA. But he wanted to create opportunity. Same thing Jesse Jackson said. Same thing Shirley Chisholm said. And I think it's really a beautiful thing when we look back on our history, our political history, when we've done things well, what actually brought us together, right? When we stick to what brings us together and we develop policies that make sense for us all, we actually do have a chance to rewrite the course of history, which gives me some sense of optimism. But it's too often when we have winners and losers, and the winners have won more than their hands can hold, and folks are dying out of neglect. We can see this happen in 10 years, and 20 more years, and 30 years. But so long as we can come together and focus on what brings us together, there's the beginning of equitable policymaking.
Yeah.
And
Sorry.
bread on the table.
I'm sorry, sir.
Yeah, I can agree with what the panel is saying, but I want to take you back to that slippery slope that you were talking about, and then I'm going to get to the appetite. That slippery slope, it may be slick, but you better put your cleats on and dig in, because nobody out there is going to give you what you want. You got to go get it. You got to plan for it. You in college, you do your best. Whatever job that you have, you do your best. You do more than what the next person is going to do to make yourself rise to the top like the cream. That's where you're going to get your recognition from. If you sit down there and you be one of the 70%ers and you just come to work and you just do your job every day, and that's all that you do, and you don't want to rise to the top, you better put your cleats on. Get up on that slippery slope and start pedaling. Climb that wall like we know that you can. You can get there. It's slippery, yes, but I got a pair of shoes on that can stick to the mud. And if I can't run, I'm gonna walk. If I can't walk, I'm gonna crawl. I'm gonna do whatever it is, whatever it takes for me to get to the top. That appetite what we're talking about, that's what it is. You gotta have that appetite. You got to be hungry. You gotta be greedy. You gotta go to it. Because if you don't get it there, and your counterpart has more than what you have, you're going to always be down here. Strive to be better, to be more. Yeah, they may hate you. They may hate you as an African-American male. Most do, maybe. But what Nixon said is those who hate you cannot win unless you hate them back. Then you destroy yourself. That's all I got.
That's all, right?
But
Yeah.
can we pause for a quick
please.
second? Because I'm inspired by your comments, and I'm also taken a bit aback. And not to create any controversy, because we're on the same team. But climbing a slippery slope, in my mind, is almost impossible. So when these students every day are climbing that slippery slope, right, and they feel defeated, they do end up graduating. They'll come through and they'll be made better for it because they have an appetite. That's the only way they get to the stage. But in no way should they be asked, to do 10 times more, better, harder, and not be compensated, respected, appreciated, or valued for that contribution. We have to fight for the equity that they deserve if we're going to move our culture forward. And as much as I'm with you, Chief, about being hungry, I don't know that greed has gotten us quite where we really want to be. And so when I talk to the students, I tap into that passion that you just shared. And I make sure that I mitigate that with this sense of culture and community that they are obviously responsible to, just as we are to them. I just wanted to lift up that passion you shared and make sure that we kind of level set, because, you know, hate is a hard thing to overcome. And I ain't never learned that we've overcome it without love.
And I would just add that it's sort of both. I don't think that those two perspectives are mutually exclusive. I think, you know, we got to climb, we got to work with what we got right now. But that doesn't mean that we don't use our power and recognize wrong, recognize injustice, recognize inequality, and command the system that is ours as citizens and demand that things change. And, you know, as you said that, and I think while I was watching the movie, I couldn't help but think about when Mayor Bradley talked about how he was the best when he was running for governor, that he was the best candidate. And, you know, I can't help but think about President Obama's hard work and how he climbed his slippery slope and what kind of experience and background he had and what kind of president he was. And yet still, it wasn't good enough. And the standard by which he is judged is far, far different than the standard by which the current inhabitor of the White House is judged. And I was just having a conversation yesterday with a pastor friend of mine, and she asked me had I watched the State of the Union, and I said no, and she kind of looked at me, and I said, listen, there was just nothing for me to learn or no new information for me to get. The only thing that was going to happen is I was going to get mad. And so I just decided not to. I'm focused on doing what I can to make changes in my state. And when it comes time in 2020 to cast that vote, then I already know what that's going to be. So then she goes on to talk about how, but he did a pretty good job, you know. She said, I'm just talking about communication. But I was, you know, and I listened, because I really try hard now to listen. No matter what I'm hearing, I'm just like, you know what? Let me hear what she's saying.
A good representative right there.
My mother told me that. She's like, stop talking so much and listen. So I listened. And what she was saying on paper made absolute sense. But I was like, you know, what about how everything he has done and said for the whole year has lowered our standard for what pretty good means? So you spend the whole year offering nothing but misinformation, telling blatant lies, using expletives when you talk to people across the world and in your own country, aligning yourself with white supremacists, doing name calling and actually making references to sexual body
Anatomy.
parts as a metaphor for your perceived power. I mean, who would ever, if somebody ever showed you a video and said one day, soon, these are going to be the words of the President of the United States, and these are going to be some of the things he does and says, who in the world would have believed that like 3 years ago? Right. It's unbelievable. And so, you know, calling all of the press fake news, and I bring that up because here we saw a man do everything he was supposed to do, operate with nothing but peace and unity and facts and information and bringing people together. He runs for mayor the first time, and all they have to do is say, he's a pawn of the liberals and the radicals, and they're going to come get us. And that won out. Now, 4 years later, people saw, right? I guess we had to see this time. But when can we make sustainable change so that we don't have to keep doing these flip-flops? And then when there's someone, an African American or Latino or a woman or whatever in office, the whole city or the whole state or the whole country doesn't say, wait a minute, did we do the right thing? You know, when can we do that and we're not doing it because everybody is losing their retirements and losing their homes, and we just vote based on the best interest of the nation so we can all come up? And that's what I'm thinking about all the time. I already know the answer. And the answer is it happens when we all engage and we really have sustainable hope that the progress that we saw is something that can continue. As long as we keep believing that all politicians are corrupt, my vote doesn't matter, and we leave it to somebody else to make decisions for us, it's going to be what somebody else says it should be.
Let me go back to the judicial branch for just a second, Your Honor. I had the feeling that you wanted to get in on this.
I was taking in everything that's been said. Truth of the matter is, I was once a college student at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, and I always felt, and I know it's easy to say that you don't have to be better, but I always felt like I needed, of course, to be the best I could be. And even when I talk to students, I'm saying, you're not going to be a Rita Bailey, but you can be the best John Doe you are and excel in what gift God gave you. And it's easy to say that, you know, the playing field is easy. But when I first started practicing law, I mean, I always, you're still going to have that feeling. I always felt like traveling all over the state, or wherever I went, that I had to be far above, far more prepared than most of my counterparts. Not just as, you know, a black female, but just as a woman as well. I mean, I think that's reality, folks. I feel like that's reality. It doesn't mean that you have to, live that every day, but I feel like yes, we should far exceed our counterparts at all times. But that doesn't mean that's a fair standard. And the example is, recently I had something in my court, and I'm learning now the way I used to obsess over filing a motion for a defendant. I wanted to make sure what they taught me, you have to have the rule of law. Yet you're supposed to make it easy for the judge to rule for your client. When I tell you somebody filed a motion to withdraw a plea that didn't even have the rule of law that applied in it, and for me to say we're going to have a hearing, it wasn't that the attorney was frustrated. He came, but I just knew at some point he was going to present the law. And when I started, and I started listening to his argument, it had nothing to do with what the book said. And what I find is that that's just the way it's been for so long. Mm-hmm. And so when I started arguing about, saying, well, that's not a real basis, he started talking about a rule that wasn't even relevant to the what he was requesting. What I found, he's been practicing law a lot longer than I have. So it's true. I mean, and he's accustomed to getting his way. It happens. I mean, and I think that right now, us having this conversation makes it easier now for people to understand. Little things like that, you wouldn't know that if somebody like me didn't tell you. And sitting out in the audience, you wouldn't know that, even in a courtroom, if somebody like me, if I didn't tell you. And I was just if I read the rule, if I had to look it up, because I'm a stickler for the rules, and that's usually how I win, is because you read the rules and you learn a lot of people don't know them. I see some lawyers in the audience laughing. But if I got to my desk, to my office early to read the rule, pull it out, brought it into the courtroom with my red book in my hand, because I'm knowing this lawyer any minute is getting ready to tell me how to give him what he asked for. Other than a few things personal, there was nothing there. And so we can say, I know what you're saying, and I respect that, but I think we still have to make sure that we acknowledge that, it exists.
I gotta ask what everybody's thinking. So did he lose?
I'm not going to answer that. I will say someone in the audience watched what went on and brought it up again today. So it was quite a show.
Let me not discount the value of hard work, because I don't want
Right.
that to be the tone here. Like my students know, like accountability is for real, because this is the world we live in, right? You do have to work 10 times harder. What I'm saying is push the culture forward, all right? If I could channel Jay-Z for a second, who I know y'all might listen to a little bit. He might not be too old for some of y'all. But he's consistently focused and had a conversation with Don Lemon on CNN not too long ago, talking about how we push culture forward, how it's important to face some of these devils right in the eye, right? We don't really want some of these things to retreat. We want to have to deal with them so that we can get beyond them. And you mentioned, how do we get to a point of sustaining this climate of equitable policy making where we can actually get beyond some of these things that have no business holding us back. But they continue to hold us back because we haven't dealt with it. We ain't got beyond it. We got to get, any first-time college students in the room, first-time college students, you are already exceptional. Mm-hmm. Your responsibilities to your families have been far and beyond exceeded their expectations. You are exceptional. You are the first, right? You are the first, and you deserve a round of applause. You will go on to break additional barriers, but we already have a first in Judge Bailey, right? So somebody's coming out to Judge Bailey, got to push this further, right? So we can get to this place of sustainability. And it's going to take hard work. But I'm telling you right now, if you don't focus on equity, we'll find ourselves falling in that trap of race, that trap of inequity and injustice that continues to hold us back. We've got to break out and beyond. Let our hard work push us beyond, not just the first, but the second and the third and the 4th and the 5th and the 6th and the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th.
Tom Bradley's theme, and the theme of this documentary was, and he's not the only one, and I mentioned that to the Sarge as we were getting ready to roll the movie earlier, that I thought if the documentary had any single flaw, it was to suggest that Tom Bradley was more or less invented coalition politics, and that's not the case. But watch MSNBC for 5 minutes, okay? When you get back, go watch MSNBC for 5 minutes, and then switch over to Fox for 5 minutes. And yet, Mr. Wilkinson sits here and asserts that he thinks that the middle may be bigger than we think it is.
Facts.
If I heard you correctly. Well, please, no, I want to hear more about that.
Look, MSNBC,
Are we as divided as some of us would think?
this room right here, I'd be willing to bet that the majority of folks in this room would move together, right? Than those of us who might find ourselves polarized on that side or this side. I'd be willing to bet that, because that's what America actually looks like. This past year's election was an interesting thing, and I think it had a lot to do with the fact that a lot of folks were disaffected, chose not to participate, or made decisions because they didn't feel engaged. Tom Bradley, when he won, it was record turnout, 76%. So that tells us if 76% all voted in an election and Tom Bradley won, right? So there were more people that voted than those who did not, right? In an extremely polarized climate, this past election cycle, we all know the truth. There were more folks that voted, but the Electoral College reigned supreme, yes? So when we look back and we think about who we need to move, we're in the room. And oftentimes we are in the room. We turn off the Truman Show, you know, or that Truman Show, and we actually have conversations. And we have dialogue like this. We begin to find out exactly where we're aligned. And even those who are on the fringes just want an invitation to participate, I'd be willing to bet. And I say that because I know folks both on Black Lives Matter side. I know folks who are both on Blue Lives Matter. And I'm just like, okay. And I know the All Lives Matter, right? And I'm just using it as an example of how the majority of people are just like, why are we fighting? We don't want people dying. We don't want conflict. We don't want any of this. We want equitable, we want jobs. We want, you know, we want access to food in our neighborhoods. We want a grocery store that we don't have to walk down the street to that has fresh food. We want a coffee shop we can go work at. These students want a job when they graduate.
That's always
Sorry?
I'm still looking for a job.
He's in purpose.
All right. One of the other things that I noticed or thought to make a note of was the distance from, I made a note here, how far, and I forgot to check it, but I think I'm pretty close. It's approximately 1,500 miles, 1,600 miles from LR to LA. But the distance really kind of irrelevant because so many of the issues seem to be of a piece. With
Seem to
those
be-
they're identical almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're in a policy seat.
Oh, well, in a lot of, so when you look at generationally sort of the things that happened in LA, you know, we've heard that they're the same things. The crack epidemic did not just affect LA. It affected Little Rock. It affected, you know, pick a city.
Right.
Pick a city. Right now, we see the opioid crisis. And it's quietly affecting Little Rock, and I say quietly because you don't see it on, you know, the news. Nobody's calling babies born to moms on drugs opioid babies the way we saw babies being called crack babies, and people are being sort of called sick. And this is, it's being addressed as a health issue versus a criminal justice issue. And it should be, but back then it wasn't. And so when you talk about, you know, someone asking the question, why are we fighting? it's the constant of seeing the inequity in the way that Black and brown communities are addressed, are treated, and so many people are afraid to truly address it on the policy level. So, you know, and I say that not like it's a doomsday and we can't overcome it. I can't say enough that the only way that things change is if and when the people change. And it's just real simple. I don't care if you watch the news every day or you don't, or you read the paper every day or you don't. You know who supports your community for the most part. Sometimes people get in there and they look a certain way or whatever. You know, they look like they're advocating and they're not. But pretty much, if you get engaged just a little bit, you know who is supporting your community and your interests. And so, for example, look at our vulnerable populations who are most negatively affected by policies that are passed on the state, federal, local level. Seniors come out and vote. Seniors' needs and concerns get addressed. Who can't vote? Children. Who has the poorest population and are treated the worst? And we pay lip service to it. We're not doing anything about the throngs of children who are being neglected, sexually abused, physically abused. We're not really doing anything about it. And then we expect police officers to be on the street and deal with this every day. So I'm just saying that for everybody who says, oh, I hate politics, who has said that before in this room? I always do a little poll, yeah. If you work a job, if you go to school, if you go to church, you deal with politics. It's just not politics in government. And I'm telling you that you cannot live your life as any kind of professional, live in the world and be self-reliant if you don't deal with the choices that people make on your behalf in your city hall, in your quorum court, in your state house, and in the White House, but more so the local government. And I'm just saying, you all have city council and mayor's race coming up for those of you in Little Rock. Y'all need to be doing your homework and asking these people, what are you going to do to address A, B, and C that affects your community? Same thing. Every time I go someplace, half the folks don't know who represents them in the legislature. So when you don't know that, like people forget, and I say this everywhere I go, we work for you. The check that I get comes out of your check. So next time you see your stub and you see all that money that comes out, that money is going to me, it's going to Tom Cotton, it's going to French Hill, it's going to Trump, even though they say that they, giving away their salaries, whatever. But it's going to Governor Hutchinson, it's going to Leslie Rutledge. So all of those things that we are doing and enabled to do it because of you voting or because you not voting, right? Or because you're not involved. And for students, you will never have another time in your life where you get to read for leisure. Some of you may have to work 1 or 2 jobs, but for those of you who don't, you have the time to go up to the Capitol. During the session, you may not know anything about it. Just go up there one day, find out who your representative is, and just be bold, as my mama says. Be bold and call somebody, send a note in, call your representative out to come meet you, and you introduce yourself and tell them that you are a student at Philander Smith College, and even though it's the fiscal session, you know the election is coming up and the legislative session is coming up, and you would like to share with them your concerns. I'm telling you, it would be so empowering because you have the power. You, the voters, have the power.
Can
you do it very quickly?
Yeah, 2 seconds. It is legitimately one of the most empowering things you can do is call someone that represents you. Because they literally have to listen to you, and it's like, oh, really? I get to say whatever I want? Yeah. So I saw a congressman on TV the other night from Arkansas. He don't represent me. But I want to give him a note of encouragement. I didn't quite appreciate what he shared. But I thought I had something that he needed to know. So number one, there are folks that don't look like you that you represent. You need to understand that. You need to consider their plight and their circumstance when you're speaking on behalf of residents, whether it be Jonesboro in Arkansas State or down south in Sea You should understand that. Call them and figure out what that feels like. Maria Menezes can tell y'all what that's like, because she's been up there on the Capitol Hills and she's had some of these conversations, and she's done quite a bit to advance immigration reform here in the state. So I can tell you right now, there's real power in the room of you and other folks. Exercise that power. It's the one thing they can't take from you.
Boss Dickerson has decreed that the last part of this program belongs to you. So, and you will see microphones at each side of the room. The panel is prepped to take your questions, so please, one at a time, and we'll get in as many as we can. My other admonition from Phyllis is that we end this at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
I don't know what starts at 8 o'clock on television. Fox News. But anyway, who got there first?
Said Fox News.
24 hours.
I got to defer to Ms. Abrams here. Annie, you're first.
Don't forget it's a question, Miss Abrams.
The question is, the documentary we saw tonight, how important is it for it to be seen by grassroots people? And we have some 500 churches, houses of worship in this city. How important, when I looked, I didn't find any of them here. How important is it to bring about justice if this was shown in all 500 of the houses of worship in the city of Little Rock?
Who wants, as quickly as we can, anyone who
It's
wants to
critically
take it.
important
Yeah,
to
Mr. Wilson.
organize our faith community. For so many years, every movement that's been catalytic in progress, in creating progress, whether it be civil rights or women's rights or what have you, you've seen some form of, or fashion faith at play, and not just, involved, but in a lot of ways leading that effort. So I think it's beyond critical that we engage.
Question over on this side, ma'am. Or just,
Go ahead.
Your Honor, you wanted to add something?
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, in the film, it was brought out that there was a lot of tension around the chief of police and the fact that the people in the city didn't trust that person, and the mayor had very little power, apparently, to get rid of him. It seems like we're facing some very similar things in the city of Little Rock, and I'm just wondering what difference do you think we could make as citizens in the city of Little Rock to hold those persons accountable that we feel might be discriminatory and are supposed to serve us and protect us?
Sarge, you want to take that?
Yeah, I say that, like she's been saying up here, the power is in the people. You've got all the power to go, whether you coordinate with a church group, whether you coordinate with any other group that's out here, or you coordinate with state senators, representatives, or whatever that you have, that's where your power is. You've got to come together as a group with one mission. That one mission is you either going and you protesting towards that police department, or you protesting towards the city hall for change. And if you can't get together as one unity, you're not going to ever get anything accomplished. You got to move forward with that. You got to, I guess, circle your wagons, get your people together, think on one accord, and move forward from there. All these other groups out here, if they agree with you, they'll move in on your group, and you have even more power. I just think the power is within the people, the community. They're the ones that run the show.
Thanks, sir. Yes, gentlemen. Yes, sir.
Hello, good evening. My question is regarding Thomas Bradley's legacy and Dr. King's dream of coming togetherness. Can those who support Trump's and his policies be, in a sense, regarded as decent people? And can you live with your neighbors and co-workers and other persons that may have racist, bigot, and anti-Semitic beliefs in the society?
I'm free to talk if y'all.
All right, Mr. Wilkinson, yeah.
I think that, so I don't think it's, the question is whether or not they're decent. we all have the freedom to vote, to express our thoughts, to gather, to protest, and to talk. Whether it's your neighbor or someone in your family, some people you don't talk to. You know, you may have divergent opinions, but I think the most important thing, irrespective of what Trump supporters do or say or whatever, is what are you going to do? How are you going to galvanize your community, your family members, and people who you can influence with real information and help them understand that you have the power to change things? Because the beautiful thing is we live in a democracy, and the power of the vote is real. And if you don't believe that your vote counts, you look around the country and see some of these races that have been won by a few votes and recounts. It's real.
Another question. If I want to get as many from the audience as I can, please. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to ask, why is it important for Black and Brown youth to continuously think about going into public office? And we have voter registration outside just as well. Okay.
I think you're a worker. Next campaign, I'm going to try to get with you.
I want to get her number.
I know. I think it's very important, and based on the documentary we see, it's very important that African Americans or students, minorities, put yourself into the arena. Oftentimes, what I find is that when it seems like the odds are stacked against you, maybe you don't have the resources, or maybe, just because you don't have a major following, that you almost talked out of presenting yourself. And a lot of times I think we don't realize that the best you is far, far more than enough. But if you don't get in the game, if you don't put yourself out there, you're actually cheating the community. You're cheating the people that you can help to rise above some of the issues that we've been talking about here today. And I feel like that's why it's so important to put us out there, because you have to be able to relate to people. And if you don't put yourself in the arena and you're just looking at this person that's far removed from your issues, and you're just allowing them to run it, your issues are never going to be addressed because you're not putting yourself there.
Yes, sir.
Earlier, you stated that money is basically the power structure of this country, but wouldn't you say it's more about who we allow to represent us in this nation versus money? Because the people in power, basically make the laws and call the shots for us. And when we do speak up about injustice in our community, and we still aren't heard, and we, in the film we watched, they wanted Chief Gates out of office, and they still didn't remove him. How do you go about that?
There are several, and we talked, so I'm not going to exercise it. He's one of my fellows, so we get a chance to chit-chat often. But what I will say, just to briefly answer the question, is money is one thing, right? And sure, it has its own strengths, but capitalism, another thing, right? And it's practiced in this country. It's not practiced, quite frankly, as it could or should. There was a time in a period where capitalism had some real significant social aspects and a significant social safety net that gets rejected a lot of times, and it should not, right? So if you read up on King's not necessarily purely a socialist. He's had some capitalist influence, and you should read up on that, number one. Number two, you asked how do we change things when we seem or feel powerless? I think that as you become more and more informed about how things work, and it starts with participation. When you get engaged and you understand who represents you, you get to ask those questions. You find out, you learn exactly how things work. You're not going to learn it all from a book, right? You learn it from participating. It's experiential. So when you do learn, you find yourself with the tools then, or at least being able to exercise those tools that build relational power, that can challenge unilateral structures, and that's when we find the type of change that's reflective of a community democracy, right, versus one that's purely based on who has the most money or has the most influence or whatever the case may be, right? We have to get out of this this concept that greed is what we should all aspire to. That's actually not what we should aspire to, right?
Phyllis has two more. We'll begin with this gentleman.
Good evening. My question is for several members of the panel, as we have district court judge, members of the public office. We have a lot of students in this room who strive to be where you are. So my question is, how are you all utilizing your platform to pave a way for many young men and women who have been in your shoes and who strive to be where you are?
I reach out and get interns to work with for the caucus, for my campaign. I speak on campuses and try to incorporate young people, students, into what we're doing. As a matter of fact, the Black Caucus is having an event at the Capitol tomorrow, 11:30 a.m. And Miss UAPB is our mistress of ceremonies. Your SGA president is going to deliver the purpose. The Philander Smith Choir is going to be singing tomorrow. But part of it is exposure and access.
Yep.
So, and I just have to say too, when you asked the question about the importance of Black and brown people running, and somebody said if you're not at the table, you're going to be on the menu. And if you don't run, you can't win.
This is the final question tonight. I'm sorry, we're just short of time. This gentleman.
All right, good evening. One of the things that, and I hope this is what was alluded to in the documentary, the police staff outnumbered or was poorly represented by the residents. Here in the state of Arkansas, I believe the numbers are 77% white and about 15% black, and I think that's Little Rock is more concentrated black, Pine Bluff black, the Delta black. Is there anything in the hiring process of the police department that kind of addresses that?
Well, I can tell you this. I mean, we do get a lot of African-American males, females that come in to apply for the police department. But they all get washed out by the background investigation. I mean, things, they may have excessive points and stuff on their driving record, or they was involved in something, some shoplifting, or it's just small stuff like that, that when they come in, or the investigators go out and do a neighborhood canvass to see what type of person that they are, and it turns out that, hey, this guy, he's a tough guy in the neighborhood. And, we like to get good, solid, qualified candidates to do that, but majority of the time, African-American males and females don't have that solid background as you would with Caucasian males and females, and that's the reason why we get watched. Because, number one, most of the time, when we come from a low-poverty area or something like that, we want to work ourselves up. We want to get out of that. But sometimes that background is what is holding us back.
I've got to make this point. That's those who are applying. But
Yes.
when the agency is not making a deliberate recruitment effort,
Oh, yeah.
and is not engaged in community policing, where you have a desire for people, where people have the desire to become a part of that agency and become a law enforcement officer, it makes a difference. And I dare I say that I believe that a lot of people who otherwise might want to be a law enforcement officer probably change their mind when they see how Black law enforcement officers and brown law enforcement officers are treated. And you know it. So, and that, you know what I'm saying, and the person knows it. So
Let me say this, and that may be true, but most time when I'm around African American, there may be a little boy or a little girl or whatever it is that may be. You know what they say? He gonna put you in jail. Won't you go with him? So it started negative from the start.
But her
From the-
experience might be that
But-
he gonna put you in
But,
jail.
but that's what starts it, because
Yeah.
they're afraid of me. You're afraid of the uniform, not me. When you come to, when I come into a room, and there's children there, it's gonna be a parent to say, hey, he coming to get you, take him away. Don't come get him, officer, he been acting bad in school.
Oh,
And so, what he do, he grow up as knowing that this police officer is gonna get me, I'm afraid of him.
Not to interrupt, but I have to tell you something. That happened to me this week. There was a gentleman that worked at a business where I was, and he was like, this is a judge. She'll put you in jail. And it was a 5-year-old. And I noticed her hiding, first she was real vocal and, talking about something she wanted her daddy to buy her and all that. And then she was, instead of him just saying, this is, Judge Rita Bailey, and allowing me to take the conversation, he said, she'll put you in jail. And the baby started, because I watch people, because that's what I do. And the baby started hiding behind her daddy.
Exactly.
And I was like, no, give me a minute, and I talked to her, and before it was over with, we were dealing with a tablet she had and talking, because that's not what I want people to think.
Exactly.
And but I think even with that happening, I had to think fast, because when I saw that child hiding behind her daddy, because I want her one day to be able to, if you see somebody, you can touch them. And, Judge Warren, I'll credit her with this. She talks about her mother. You have to be able to feel of them, touch them, see them. So you go and put yourself in the school, you talk to them. So, I didn't have much more than you guys had when I was in college. I figured it out. But, you just have to take that into your own hands. Because when that child did that, it made me realize, no, it's my responsibility. He's not understanding what this is doing. And I'll deal with him later. But right now, this 5-year-old, I need to, I don't want her memory to be, I met a judge and she'll put me in jail. And that's
Fantastic panel.
Thank you. Thank you. So real quickly, first of all, thank you for our panelists for this evening. And I would be remiss if I did not thank Dan Coop. Dan, can you raise your hand? He was responsible for ATN to help put this together. And members of all the public administrators that work for the City of Little Rock, can you please stand? You work for the City of Little Rock. Thank you. And there are a couple out there. And so those are National Forum for Black Public Administrators. AETM was another sponsor, the great Philander Smith College. And if you are a member of the Little Rock Black Police Officers Association, I know you're in the room, can you please stand? And so, again, for those of you who are interested in the National Forum for Black Public Administrators, I know there are interest cards out there. If you have not registered to vote, there are forms out there to register to vote. Know your rights information and how to deal with law enforcement as well. Is also out there. There are collaterals on the table over there.
I love it. I'm easy to deal with.
This came.
Writing.
Representative Hodges came. I just want to recognize him. Monty Hodges, Representative Hodges.
Representative Hodges, thank you for being here. Also, I'm sorry, I didn't hear. And so again, on behalf of the National Forum for Black Public Administrators, AETN, and thank you so much for Philander Smith College allowing us to use your campus. We are forever grateful. Have a good night.
All right. That was great.
Good to see you.
Yes.
Enjoy it.